Good afternoon, everybody. I'm your host, LionelTavares from the Sabbath at Midnight, here to bring you these new t-shirts we just got made. They have the crucifix in the front, very obvious, so you could show off exactly who you represent. The back has the old school, old English. Okay, we're keeping it gangster, and we're keeping it truthful. So if you guys want to grab one of these shirts and you're not ashamed to represent Jesus Christ, and you want to help a Christian podcast grow and reach bigger audience, please reach out and we will sell you one of these shirts for a very reasonable price. If you are international, it will be a little extra, but work with me and I'll work with you. I hope you guys have a good day and God bless.
Welcome back to the Sabbath at Midnight. I'm your host, Dominic. And tonight we have an interesting show. We have Mark Steves on. I'll say Mark Steves. And he has a very, very interesting view on megaliths here in America. Now, we hear about megaliths in Peru and other parts of the world, but not so much here in America. And I came upon Mark on other shows, and I was struck by when he discovered megaliths and other sorts of strange phenomena here in America. And I think it's very important for people here in this country to understand that, yes, there are these ancient ruins here in our own country, our home country. And Mark, welcome to the Sabbath at Midnight podcast. Please give the listeners a way to get a hold of you and any works you've done.
Sure, yeah. Mark from the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. That's me. If you want to get a hold of me, just go to myfamilythinksimcrazy.com and check out the podcast, listen. And I'm excited to be here and get into this stuff. As you said, many people don't realize that there are megaliths here in America. So it's interesting, and I think it's not by accident. It's not just because they're not as cool or as worthwhile as the megaliths in other places. I think it's more to do with a lack of or a failure to acknowledge the history of America in a way that is free of any political or racist bias. And, I'm not one of these people who thinks, America's a racist country or anything like that. I think that's a big part of the rhetoric and the social divide right now. Really what I think people need to understand is that there's been an active movement to suppress certain groups of people who have been here prior to Columbus, and you can call that racist, sure, but I think it's got a political motivation to sort of stake the claim for the land here in America. They had to sort of wipe the slate clean so that maybe people wouldn't fight back. I don't know. I've only really just begun to look into all this stuff, so people may disagree. But what I found is that there's tons of megaliths all across the United States. Obviously, there's tons of mounds, and some of these mounds have megaliths or just stones as a part of their construction. So the two are intertwined. And although archaeologists say, the mounds were created by Native Americans, most Native American tribes themselves don't acknowledge building the mounds. They attribute it to a different group, a group that they, for the most part, say separate from them. There might be exceptions to that. There may be certain tribes who have lineage with the mound builders, sure, but I think that for the most part, we have a group of people that's been kind of ignored historically here in America. And maybe there's some reasons why. Regardless, there are these stones that exist all around the country that people can go and interact with. You were just showing me photos of some stones. You're out west, so I couldn't even begin to wrap my head around how or why those types of stones are even there in what looks like a very dry place. You said that was coral. So yeah, I mean, that brings to mind like old maps of the island of California when it was an island. But again, I don't know exactly where those photos were taken. So maybe that's just an assumption on my part, but where I live is New England. So, it's the entire East Coast for the most part is the oldest part of America, technically, not just by, the fact that the Europeans came here first. I mean, that's the mainstream record, but also there's land along the East Coast that is geologically very, very old. It's actually, I think, a part of Africa as well. Like Africa and North America at one point in time were connected somehow geologically. So there's very ancient stones along the East Coast in New England, and some of those stones have gone to be built into some of the nation's greatest monuments. The Statue of Liberty's base, the Lincoln Memorial, the base of the Washington Memorial, aka the obelisk in DC. And I started learning all about these stones because I just started noticing all the rocks around New England and thought, maybe the Native Americans had something to do with this. And it turns out maybe they had, but there could be other groups of people that had traveled here prior to Columbus that engaged in these types of practices. Because when you look around the world, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, it seems like there's a line going through North America, Northern Europe, and Northern Asia where you see the same types of structures, stone dolmens, stone arrangements, like Stonehenge is probably the most famous, but there are other examples of these calendar formations and different variations of calendar stones. So, here in New England, we have some stone chambers, whereas many people are probably more familiar with Stonehenge, which is, stones coming out of the ground, almost like a sundial that you can stand in the middle of, right? Whereas these stone chambers in New England have specific holes in the stone walls where light shines through on specific days. So it essentially does the same thing that Stonehenge does, just utilizing a different technique with the stone. You could also argue that those stone chambers would probably have a multi-purpose function of allowing one or multiple people to sit inside and meditate during those special times of the year, or perform some sort of ceremony. I mean, I don't know that meditation would have been something the Native Americans practiced, possibly, but meditation does feel like a sort of new age type thing. But anyways, I've kind of spoken a lot.
Yeah. Well, out here, you mentioned we were speaking before the show about what I discovered here, and you made a good point that California was once part of, as an island, and these structures are near, kind of close to Salton Sea, and it seems that back in the ancient times, the Gulf of Mexico was into this part of now what they call the Coachella Valley. It was underwater. And there's stories of the conquistadors, and you can go into the stories about how conquistadors met groups of giants along the riverbanks. And, there's stories of a Viking ship here somewhere lost in the sand. Who knows? And there's other stories of conquistadors that sailed through here. So, I mean, it's all really a mystery. And what you discovered out there in your part of the country, that's really amazing. It's really amazing stuff out there. And I wonder, up in these mountains here in the Santa Rosas, are there any megalithic walls up here or any kind of structures? What's your take? Have you heard anything about California having any megalithic walls? Or
That's a good question. No, unfortunately, I've never been to California, nor have I done much research. I know about the Blythe intaglios. I have done a podcast about this subject, but I mean, the nature of that show, Esoteric America, is that we take this sort of arrow to the map, or what do you call it, dart to the map, and pick a random place and then do some research and talk about it. So, I mean, that information is certainly not readily available off the top of my head, unfortunately. But no, I don't know that there are many stone walls in a place like California, maybe in the less arid regions. But I would imagine in a desert, very few people would take the time to stack rocks unless they really, needed it bad. I can imagine using stones for farming. You need to create walls to keep certain animals from rummaging through your plants. And also there are other particular uses for stone when it comes to gardens and farming. But, I can't imagine that people would be taking the time to do stone constructions in a place where it is so hot that you yourself mentioned that, you're not going to be able to go and do a cast of that print you found because it is so hot. Well, yeah, unless they were building it only in the cooler times of years. I mean, I don't imagine there are many stone structures, but hey, I've never been. So, but what I could imagine is maybe the remnants of structures that were built long ago when the climate was different, shipwrecks and whatnot. But yeah, as far as stone walls go, the stone walls that I know about are all on the East Coast, and people who live on the East Coast or even have just visited know about the stone walls. You could see them; they're in everybody's front yard. Many people have them as part of their front yard or backyard, so they're all over the place. And some of them, most of them, were built by farmers. We're told. We're not told which farmers. It could be Native American farmers. There were more than 44 million people here prior to Columbus. And, yeah, it's very curious what was here and how quickly the people vanished as Europeans moved westward. I mean, in the first 50 to 60 years, of European colonization of the New World here, they wiped out something like, I don't know, several million just through diseases, we're told, right? So, I mean, I don't know how true any of that is because, hey, I've never built a time machine, so I can't go back and verify it. But, going off of what history tells us, there are so many people here that just died instantly. So, I don't know if maybe the people that were left said, okay, well, hey, there's all this property with land divided into these farm spaces. Let's just go and take it over,
Right.
That's something that very well could have happened. But whether or not, the natives built the stone walls or the farmers built the stone walls, they're all over the place. And I started to just ask questions about them and look at them and try to study them. And fortunately, we found some stone megaliths that I think take the research to another level because, stone walls, sure, people can explain those away as being built by people within the last couple hundred years. Sure. I mean, even though some of them go over mountains, some of them go through forests, old forests, the very few that we have here, even some of them have these stone walls. Despite all that, you can't explain some of these stone structures as being built by farmers because many of them defy, what people could physically do at the time they're purported to have been built. So what am I saying there? Okay, well, if you're a farmer, you have maybe 10 kids or so, a couple strong boys. You maybe have some neighbors. You maybe have some townspeople that can come in and help you. So maybe you have some manpower, 10 or 15 people, but some of these stones are megatons, right? They're multiple tons, and even 10, 15, 30 people can't move that much weight just with like pulleys and, even an ox or so. A lot of these explanations for the stone megaliths fall short when you kind of have to consider how they were built. Now, the Native Americans, they have stories about giants throwing stones around. They talk about this one giant who was playing a game with his brothers, this game where they'd take one stone and place it on top of another, and then take a stone and try to, toss it at that stone to knock it off the stone. And, I guess this was a game that people played back then, but they talk about giants playing it and creating this stone formation where you have relatively small boulders holding up a massive boulder. Okay. This standing stone, as they're called. And you can look them up. There's one in Salem, New York. There's one in Massachusetts. I mean, there's several standing stones. I visited one that's in the on the Connecticut-New York border, close to New York City. And yeah, these things are just massive. And when you consider that, the only other place in the world that we see structures like this are in Ireland and Scandinavia, it makes you wonder, maybe the Native Americans had, stronger relationship with the Vikings and the Celtic peoples than we previously understood. I mean, for the most part, it was the English, the Dutch, the Spanish. These are the people that came in and cleaned up what was America after Columbus. And, the Irish and them, they didn't come into America until hundreds, maybe a little bit later, famously immigrants in the lower classes of society. So I wonder to myself, like, maybe there's some suppression of information here where you have this, what seems like a contiguous culture of people. They might not have all been the same ethnicity, but they had similar practices and similar ceremonies just based on what's still extant on the ground here. I mean, I've found standing stones that look like, we're in Norway or something, it's crazy. It's really defies explanation when they tell us that, the Native Americans, they just invented spears and bow and arrows. They didn't really expand much beyond that in the classes I attended. And that is just so narrow views, short-sighted. It's totally far off from the truth. You have so many examples of this sophisticated Native American culture. And again, we're not saying that the Native Americans did it all themselves, right? I mean, right. Maybe they had some sort of connection with other groups, right? And that has been underplayed throughout the past 100 years because of who has colonized America. Right. So, the megaliths here in America, they might not be that spectacular. Yes, there's an American Stonehenge in New Hampshire, and it doesn't have the same impact as the Stonehenge in Avebury does, right? It's just not as physically impressive. But when you look at the landscape comparatively, it makes sense as to why the, stones would be different. They would be smaller. You're talking about a place that's mountainous. You might not have many large stones. And if you do, they're all concentrated, and you got to bring them from one place to another. So I wonder, maybe it's just different environment. So you have a smaller sort of Stonehenge, and it's the same culture building these two Stonehenges as a way of, keeping track of their year and their place in the universe, right? These stone structures have a sort of practical purpose, but they have a ceremonial and spiritual purpose that goes up beyond that. So You have to wonder, like, were the Native Americans participating in that? Were they sort of like brothers in these ceremonies with the Viking peoples and the Celtic peoples? I mean, you look at these cultures and they all have a shamanistic aspect to them. So it's very possible that there's a sort of connection there, and maybe these shamans from Finland are practicing at the root the same thing that shamans down in Navajo country are practicing. It's just taken different forms as they've traveled into different regions and time has gone on.
Absolutely. What makes me wonder is, how did they move these stones, and how did they, because some of these stones are very amazing. They're so smooth, and the way they're jointed together, they're mortarless. And how did they move these massive stones back in these times? I mean, were there giants that moved these, or was it some sort of harmonic, technology, that some kind of sound frequency that lifted them? And how did they, I mean, you can't smooth out these rocks just with copper chisels. I mean, there's no way, it would never work. Because the mold scale on these rocks it's tremendous. I mean, a copper chisel won't do anything like these. Some of these archaeologists say that was used in, like Egypt or something. And, when I think about all this, and I looked at, other structures like in Peru and across the world, and I see these rocks, they're all like in different patterns. And for me, I always looked at it, is that a language? Is that something that they use, or some kind of puzzle they use together for these rocks to make some kind of frequency, some kind of energy? A certain pattern is needed. Have you come across anything like that in your research, that, the possibilities?
Well, there is a book that talks about that. So, when we're looking at the standing stones and the stones that are sort of perched stones, there's also these, stones, like I said, platformed on top of each other. So, there's multiple different arrangements. There's technical names for each different arrangement, and the way each stone is placed, I'm sure, has a purpose, right? So with some of these, what you have going on is a piezoelectric exchange. So just like in a watch, you have a little hammer that hits a quartz crystal, and that supplies the watch with enough energy to keep ticking until it hits this, same cycle point where, boom, it hits the hammer again, and then it has enough energy, right, to keep going around however many, hours or whatever, however long that little charge takes to be dispersed, and then the hammer gets hit again, right? So that same function, if gravity is what we're told, I mean, not that I'm a huge, believer in gravity and physics as we're told.
Right.
But what you have going on is these tremendously massive stones that are exerting force on relatively much smaller stones. And when that happens, that excess energy that can't go into that small stone because it's full has to go somewhere else, right? That's just how things work. That's the law of energy exchanges, right? So I imagine that this was something that people without technology and without lights in their home, people who were more sensitive and in tune with nature, I think they would have been able to feel the magnetism, right? They would have been able to go under a stone like that and feel it. And I think people today can do that, with the right practice and sensitivity, or awareness rather. I think you can feel these things, these forces. But there's a book called Stone or Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty. It might be vice versa, but it's something like that. And the author's hypothesis, and he actually, I believe, proved this, that when you put seeds underneath these stone structures, where that excess energy, that electromagnetic force is flowing, as I described, it actually boosts the potential of those seeds. So that crop will grow 3-4 times as large and as plentiful as it could have because of that treatment. So, the Native Americans, they were very intelligent people. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that they knew that this was something they can do to boost the vitality of their seeds. And I imagine this is, again, it was practical, it was pragmatic, but it also demonstrated the invisible forces of the world, which is something that uplifts and confirms their spiritual worldview as well. So simultaneously, these things are kind of flowing together. But I think the stone structures work like that, where, there are these invisible forces that can flow through them and into them, and they can be utilized for different purposes. Obviously, farming is just one purpose. We can look at the obelisks and the pyramids of Egypt and say, okay, what's going on there? That's a topic for a different expert. Obviously that's something I like to talk about on my show, but I'm certainly not qualified to explain all that. I mean, I could maybe give my theory, my thought, if you want later on, but as it pertains to like the stones and whatnot, each stone has a crystalline aspect to it for the most part. I mean, there are exceptions, sandstone might be an exception. There's other exceptions, right? We all remember the basic geology from school, right? Igneous rocks, we have metamorphic rocks, and then we have the other one, right? What's the other one? Sedimentary rocks, right? So not all rocks are made the same. But if you look at these structures around the world, for the most part, most of the megaliths are the type of stone that can channel electricity, channel it really well, or carries like this charge, right? And I think there's something to that. And like I was saying before, people maybe intuitively knew that, they sensed that somehow. Maybe they were instructed to build these things from people who had more knowledge from the past. Who knows why? But I think on these stones, you find tons of examples of cultures that we're told didn't belong in America at the time that these things were created, right? So we have examples of like Hebrew on stones in America, and people have wondered for years, like, are these forgeries? Did the colonists make these when they came here, or are these actually like people from biblical times who wrote this way, who traveled to America long ago, maybe after the flood? I mean, these are all potentials, right? So, and there's an author, Barry Fell, whose book is sort of contested by the mainstream guys, which makes sense considering what his theory says, but I found it to fit into a lot of what I've been looking into very nicely. So he explains that he's found Egyptian hieroglyphs, Celtic Ogham, Iberian Punic script, and then he's found examples from Libyan culture, and he's also found script from the people from the Basque region of France, which they themselves are a mysterious group. So yeah, this is it's all been recorded over the past 100 and 150 years. And for the most part, it gets categorized as like alternate archaeology or, forbidden archaeology, this type of archaeology that the modern mainstream view just doesn't allow to have any sort of credibility because it doesn't fit into this established paradigm of Columbus set sail 1492 across the ocean blue and look at all he found, right? And obviously that's silly because, the Native Americans themselves, they don't talk about coming over the land bridge. There's no people any tribe that says, oh yeah, we came over the land bridge. Even the people in the far north of Canada, like they don't have stories like that either. Their stories are, we've been here. This is is where we're from, So I think a lot of what people presume about America and the ancient history of America is just all propaganda. And we need to start to peel back these layers, these onion layers, and find what's at the core. Cause yeah, I mean, the Native Americans, they're such skilled canoe smiths, right? They've been able to create boats for way before the Spanish ever came.
Right.
They know how to create boats. So you're telling me that, these people walked to America on ice, right? These people who created, I mean, if scientists say that wind can take something like a bird or a monkey or even a seed or an insect into the air and across the ocean, right? Because that's how scientists explain some species that have made it, like from Africa to South America. This has been a big question. Like, how did these creatures get there, or have they just been, there forever, right? And I wonder, maybe it wasn't, a gust of wind that blew them across the ocean. Maybe it was people, right? Because when people travel, they take things with them. They take plants with them. They take animals with them. I mean, even today, people traffic animals, they traffic plants, they traffic drugs, right? So these types of things have been moving across the world for a long time. And we need to start to really think about these presumptions that we're given from the mainstream when it comes to history of America, South America, North America, and, why we're given this paradigm that over and over again proves to be false. I wonder if there's some, biblical sort of a conspiracy going on. I mean, that kind of sounds silly to the uninformed possibly, but, we have all this talk of the giants who died during the flood. And according to Paul Stobbs, who I know you also recently interviewed, some of these giants survived the flood, right? There's talk of giants surviving the flood. And then pair that with the giant skeletons that were found throughout America in the mounds, with the legends from the Native Americans about giants. I mean, you have to wonder, like, okay, maybe these people are connected to these giants somehow, and that's why they're covering it up. Maybe they have the same bloodline without the freaky genetics that makes them super tall. I mean, that you got to wonder, because sure, there are people around the world that have, tall genes that make them tall, but these giants were 7 feet tall and they were big. They were thick, they were almost a different type of human, right? So I think we all have to wonder, like, why are these skeletons just kind of being swept under the rug when anyone can go to their library and look through the newspaper archives and find stories of giant skeletons being pulled out of the ground or pulled out of mounds or found during the, construction of a home when they had to dig out to put a basement in, right? And they'd find a huge skeleton or something. I mean, this kind of stuff happened and there's record of it, yet it's not accounted for, right? Oh yeah, well, there were just some really tall Native Americans and that's all. That's how they want us to write it off.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. I mean, not that Native Americans aren't tall. Sure. There's tons of examples of Native Americans who were very tall and very large, but again, like, is that because Native Americans are that way, or because those particular Native Americans have this same lineage with that type of people that were large and, traveled across the more Arctic region or the northern hemisphere of the planet, like along the 40th parallel and northward would be kind of where we see evidence of their culture.
Yeah, I believe that. And the Native Americans say that when they discuss the mounds, they were there already. They didn't build them. And then you go back to Abraham Lincoln's speech at Niagara, where he says, this once ancient race of giants that once gazed across this nation. So Abraham Lincoln acknowledged that there was a giant race. And when you're talking about the 7-footers, it brought back a memory from L.A. Marzulli when he found that photograph at the Catalina Island Museum. They deduced that the giant skeleton was about 9 foot tall. And I mean, that's a big person. And you add to the fact that it probably just wasn't just a tall, skinny person. It probably had, mass to it proportionally. And so, I mean, I just wonder, when you're speaking about the flood, and in the Bible says, the giants were here before the flood and after the flood. So, I mean, what happened? I mean, obviously there were giants here because the Conquistador chroniclers noted that they came across giants here in America, especially around Florida, and also up along the Colorado River, not too far where I'm from. And so yeah, there's history of giants, and out here in a small farm town called I think it's Blythe. There's intaglios of you can only see them from the sky, which is really bizarre. I mean, there's a humanoid, there's a Cocopelli, and there's other like rock art, out in the desert. It's very ancient. They don't know how old it is. They estimate maybe 2,000 years ago, maybe 3,000. They really can't determine when this was constructed on the earth. These giant megalithic petroglyphs in the earth, and stuff like this needs to be researched more. And that's why it's fascinating to have you on, because you've done a lot of stuff out in the northeast part of the country. And I know you got into the ley lines, and how does that correlate to these megaliths? Because I think there's a connection between the New Hampshire megalithic site to Stonehenge. I think there's a ley line there, right?
That's a good question. I've talked about this, but I can't say I've gone and tried to line that one up. I don't know if it lines up, at least using the line that I've described. I mean, hey, you could draw a line any two ways on the planet, and you could connect things, and maybe other things will also be connected, so not that means that all of these lines are inherently just like happenstance, but when it comes to those two structures, yeah, I'm not sure. The ley lines are fascinating. The Blythe intaglios are fascinating. When it comes to the East Coast, I mean, there's a couple different authors who've looked into this stuff, and I was just lucky enough to find their books, on our travels. My girlfriend and I, who also is very interested in this stuff and researches it with me. And, it just so happened to be that one of these ley lines described in this book by Glenn Kreisberg goes right through my home state of Connecticut. So that was fascinating to us. We're like, oh, wow, okay, this is cool. We got to look into this and, go and do a road trip over to some of these spots and see what's on the ley line. And we did that. And the ley line's called the Hammonasset ley line, which I believe they named it that because of Hammonasset Beach, which is where the ley line kind of touches land after going over Long Island Sound. So, yeah, all of that kind of just synchronistically unfolded where, one day we don't know anything about this, and then I step into a bookstore, and the next day we know about this ley line, but what's next? So I started talking about it, and my friend Mike says, oh, you got to look into this guy, Peter Shampoo. He's written about ley lines, and he actually wrote about some that go through Connecticut. So now I'm like, what? two ley lines that go through Connecticut. Like, I didn't think any ley lines went when you look in the ley lines, some of the first ones that probably come up are like the one that goes like along the 33rd parallel, or maybe people talk about like the original ley lines in England where the name comes from, or maybe they even talk about like Washington, DC, right? But I for one, I didn't know that any one person had like a list of ley lines, like that to me was new. And Peter, sure enough, he had, as a dowser, which is a type of, intuitive science of using certain objects to figure out where these energy lines are moving along the planet. He used those skills to figure out where the ley lines were here in the East Coast of the United States. So my girlfriend and I, we start driving along these areas, and next thing you know, we're driving up this ley line that Peter Shampoo calls the chakra ley line. So we stop at one chakra point, then we stop at the next chakra point, and then we stop all the way up in Massachusetts, which was as far as we could go that day, at the third chakra point. And we're walking around this beautiful town. It's called Shelburne Falls, and there's some stone along the waterfall that have these like perfectly circular cavities that, people say the water forms. And I talked to one guy who said lightning actually makes that happen, which is even crazier and very interesting. I'm not sure yet either way, but I trust the person who said that. Now, again, going into the bookstores, we go into this bookstore in Shelburne Falls at the third chakra point and find a book called The Manitou. And that tells us all about the stones around New England and how they have this whole spiritual component to them, and how the Native Americans did use them in certain ceremonies. And so all of this just kind of one led to another in this very synchronistic way. And, we're still on that journey, and people can follow up and, learn more from me about that by picking up my PDF that I wrote that includes photos of a megalith that we actually found, synchronistically, one that wasn't in a book, at least any book that we're aware of. And for the most part, it's not like something that the town acknowledges. So I'm very curious where this is going to take us. Like, we recently went to a Native American museum and told them about it, and they seem very interested to learn more about it. So yeah, I don't know what's going to happen next. And I mean, there are so many stone structures out there and many different books about these stone structures. But again, this is like a topic that is kind of considered like alternative archaeology. It's not really accepted by the mainstream. And I think that's because they're trying to cover up whatever these giants have to do with. And maybe it's not even a cover up. Maybe people just hear giants and they think, oh, you guys are religious nuts, or you're obsessed with the Bible, or, whatever. They don't want to look at it because this just doesn't fit into their worldview that they've been indoctrinated into, that says science is their new god and the universities can do no wrong and never, never admit to their own hypocrisies or short-sighted like views on things. That's, I think, a lot to do with what's going on, especially when you consider some of the universities like Yale and Harvard have been a part of America since the absolute beginning, and like really laid the groundwork for all the other schools to form in the way that they had. So, people think like, well, how could all these professors and all these colleges all be working in lockstep like that? They couldn't be. And they can. I mean, it's hard to believe, but it's true. Of course, there's always going to be exceptions. There's always going to be people who go against the grain, and God bless those people. But unfortunately, I think the universities are just indoctrinating people, and it's because they have a political motive invested in it, and they're in cahoots with the same people who have corrupted the government. You know, they're the corrupt CIA, the corrupt FBI, the corrupt everyone. I mean, it's, you know, you walk around your forest or your state park or wherever, and you see these stone structures and you think, like, how could the CIA be involved in suppressing information about this? And it's true in this like really backwards kind of way, because so many other things in our society are stalwarted, you know, so is this. And that's just that's the umbrella effect of living in this kind of corrupt system. And I don't mean to sound like cynical here, because I mean, the stones are literally speaking out to us. You know, sure, they can take a bulldozer and maybe try to destroy these things. You know, I really hope they don't, but they are permanent without that happening. I mean, these things are permanent in a way. You know, they're not immortal. You know, water and the weather will wear them away eventually. But as far as our lifetimes go, these stones are like this living record outside of us that can tell us about very far into the past. And we can't ignore that kind of stuff or dismiss it as something that was built, you know, or forged in the past 100 years. It's just, I don't know how many people would go through that much effort for a forgery. And what's the reward? You know, what's the reward for that? You know, you look at Ed Lee Scannell at Coral Castle in Florida and how he moved all that coral around, right. Just one person. You know, it's like, clearly there are ways to do this stuff that's not publicly available, the information at least, but anyone can go to Coral Castle and, you know, try to explain that. You know, based on the story we're given, it defies construction physics as we know it today. So yeah, I feel like so many of these landscapes are hiding little secrets like that. You know, I'm not so familiar with your landscape, you know, only through books, but I could tell you, if you ever come out to the Northeast, there's plenty to see. There's, you know, it might be hiding behind some brush and some green trees, but yeah, it's there for sure.
And there's also megalithic walls in Montana.
Oh yeah, I don't doubt it. I mean, there's even the whole legend about how a giant beaver created that big lake over there in Montana, Flathead Lake. So, I mean, anywhere you have Native Americans, I think you're going to have secrets, because the Native Americans, they're not, you know, they've been beaten up, beaten down, yeah, you know, and they're still standing. They got to hold on to everything they got. You know, they're not going to give up all their secrets to the people that have enslaved them, right, you know?
Right.
So, I mean, I'm not a native myself, so I can't speak for them, but I understand that pain. I understand why someone would want to keep those things a secret. So I wouldn't be surprised if the natives can levitate stones with the power of their mind, you know, like we look at what the Shaolin monks do and think like, oh yeah, only people from the East can do those kind of things. It's like, no. We're all human beings. We all have that great potential. So maybe we're able to move stones with our mind. Maybe we're able to make them lighter, or maybe the people back in the day were just such behemoths that three of them could lift something that it would take us, you know, to build a machine to move.
Mm-hmm. I just wonder, how did they carve these things? And a lot of these blocks have those little nodules on them. Like, what were those nodules for? I mean, I look at that, it's like, okay, it looks like some kind of tube was in there. They were injecting, you know, melted granite into these forms or something. I don't know. It's really strange. These little knobs.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you're speaking about, but I've seen like holes in stones that are like tubes have been cut into the stone.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe that's evidence of them using like rope to lift these stones into place. And right, that's just like a keyhole to tie the rope through. I mean, that's something that people do today in stonemasonry. So But I don't know. I mean, there's so many different little things that defy explanation. And, I don't know if this is a video podcast or not,
No.
but so, no real use in sharing photos, but there's, tons of examples. If people want a place to start, they can look at my book that I have available on my website, the PDF. It's only like $8, and you could see all the stones that I've found. And I have in my bibliography other books that talk about this stuff. So it's a good place to start if you're interested. But okay, yeah, I see what you're talking about now. There's like little knobs,
right,
like almost like a foothold if you were to climb up that wall, like with the people who do free climbing or whatever. Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, that could just be the stone that they picked to put in the wall. Like, I don't know.
It's really strange. It's all a mystery. It's really a mystery. All these, these giant stones. And the one you said you discovered out there that's not in any books, what is it? Can you describe it? What does it look like? The megalith you found.
Yeah, so it's one of these megaliths that's classed as a perched boulder, which means that it's one very large boulder on top of a even larger boulder underneath it. And about 5 or 6 yards away from it, there's a standing stone that's about 6 feet tall.
Oh.
And, I saw this standing stone while we were driving. I'm like, oh, wow, what's that? We pull over and we walk up to it, and there's like a stone wall kind of behind it. And off in the distance, I see this big, huge boulder on top of another boulder. So I'm like, oh, wow. And we run over to it, and I look at it from a different angle, and I see that this stone has like a finger protruding out from it, almost like the stone has like a bird's neck. And we look at it on this angle, and I'm like, oh, wow, it looks like a bird stone. Because one of the artifacts that people find next to arrowheads are these little bird-shaped stones that Native Americans would carve out of softer types of stone. And it was like a ceremonial or like a symbolic spiritual type of thing. Maybe you'd give it as a gift or as like a toy, or like, I'm not exactly sure that they even know what the bird stones were used for. But I mean, it's similar to like the size of like a pipe. It's not very big, but this one that we found is huge. I mean, it's massive, and it's shaped kind of like a bird, and it's pointing towards the west where the sun sets. So yeah, I mean, again, I don't know. Maybe someone else has written about this one before, or the local tribe or whatever has a story about it. I don't know, because I'm not from that part of town. Like, I'm not from that part of the state. We're just driving through. But yeah, it's definitely something that I think people take for granted, that, oh yeah, megaliths are only in England, or it's, Egypt or whatever. No, they're everywhere. You guys just got to look for them. I mean, they could be in your own backyard if your land is big enough.
I agree. And there's if memory serves me correct, there's another stone structure, megalithic wall, or some type of, I don't know if it's a small city block or something in Texas. It's got like a underground, I don't know if it's a tomb or what, but it's in Texas somewhere. I don't remember where. Yeah,
there's a very old stone wall in Texas. Yeah, I think it's even in a town called like Stonewall, Texas. But
is that what it is?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Yeah, there's tons of examples of this type of architecture, and people wondered like, oh, did the French build that? Did this Spanish build that? But when you find out how old it is, they're like, oh, well, we don't know who built it. And that's because they don't want to explain that far into the past. I think they're happy with people not knowing.
Makes you wonder if way back, if any of these tools they used, technology, if it was confiscated and now it's hidden away for whatever reason. That's what I wonder about, because these stones, like, getting back to the stones, and whether looks like they were softened or molded like putty or something, just marshmallowed together. especially in Peru. And
I mean,
I don't know.
I don't know. I think, people want to make money, right? So everybody's going to try to do something better than the next guy.
Right.
I mean, sure, there's a possibility that there's a conspiracy. I mean, I would find it hard to believe that there's like a conspiracy amongst like construction workers,
Right.
it just seems to me like that's the type of job where if you could do it easier and cheaper, you would, But yeah, I mean, who knows why? Maybe maybe there's a reason why we can't do it anymore that goes beyond our capability of fixing. Like, what if the planet has a different like energy field than it used to, and just things are less magnetic than they used to be? And
Good point.
in the past, they were able to, manipulate the magnetic nature of the Earth in certain ways that we can't now because of, you name it. Maybe it has to do with electricity, the way we're using it, where there's electricity everywhere. And I mean, who knows? It could be something like, oh, well, that's Tesla tech and we can't make money off of it. So we're not going to use it. We're not going to use free energy because we can't charge people for it. It could be something like that,
Good point. That's a really good point. Because, yeah, we all know about Tesla. He supposedly had a way of generating energy, free energy out of the air, just capturing the Earth's natural electric field. I guess that's what he accomplished. But that was all gone away now, all taken away. So who knows? It's a mystery now.
Right.
It would have been nice to have that now. The way the electricity bills are going these days are ridiculous.
Right.
You live on a hot climate like I do, and it's crazy. It's really crazy. So, what's your next journey? What are you looking forward in your field of research? What are you looking at accomplish here by the end of the year? Any goals?
Yeah, we got some goals. I'd love for more people to, support the podcast so we can get out and do like in-person interviews. Mm-hmm. But as far as research goals go, I'm continuing my research into everything we've discussed today with the stone structures. And, I'm hoping to put out very soon the next episode of podcast that I'm working on that is for supporters only right now, but eventually I'll most likely publish it somewhere for free. But it's essentially like a documentary in a podcast. That's been done before, but this is going to be about Skull and Bones, which I don't believe has been done before. And I think it's just a very interesting topic because, everybody has heard of Skull and Bones and Yale University. And
right.
I do happen to live nearby, so it's kind of like a local interest, but also like the more I look into this group, the more I find that like they're connected to so much, and not just Skull and Bones, but Yale University and everything that's been accomplished there. So, not exactly anywhere finished, but I'm excited. It's not going to be what people expect. I think it's going to be like a refreshing take on this topic that's been talked about a lot. Everybody knows the whole George Bush, John Kerry thing. I think I'm going to get into some aspects of Skull and Bones and that whole world that most people probably haven't heard about. So
that's very interesting. I'm interested in that. I've heard about Skull and Bones. It's a dark, I don't know, dark topic, I guess. It goes deep. And I don't know, obviously, as much as you do, you're doing the research in this, but the little I do know on the surface, it's an interesting topic. It really is. And I'm sure the listeners will gravitate towards that, something along those lines that people wonder about, what does Skull and Bones all entail? That'll be a really good one, Mark. It really will. Can't wait for it to come out. All right. But thank you for coming on our podcast. give the listeners once again how to find you and your PDF files and anything you've written.
Yeah, the website that sells the PDFs is Ko-Fi. You could just type in myfamilythinksimcrazy.com and it'll have the links to that. And I got a bunch of stuff available on all the audio platforms for anyone listening. Go and check out My Family Thinks I'm Crazy wherever you listen to podcasts, and just start there. And, anything else that you've heard me talk about today, as far as like the stone structures, that's Scene Edition 2, where I talk about that and give some photos and some more info about that whole subject. So, but yeah, I appreciate you inviting me on, and this has been a very interesting conversation, getting into some stuff. I apologize. If I'd known, I would have done a little bit more like California research for you, but right. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a ton of stuff out there as far as the natives go and the ancient history goes. I mean, it's a whole different animal when it comes to the West Coast.
Yeah,
I wouldn't even know where to start.
There's stuff up here in these mountains. People just need to go out there and do some hiking. There's an acquaintance I have up the mountain. He says there's a lot of ancient writings up there in the rocks, petroglyphs, and one of his neighbors came upon an entity laying by a cave, and he says it was a lizard, like a reptilian. The guy's reluctant to come on and talk about it or tell me where exactly this location is, and all these petroglyphs, and I don't know. It could be a portal there. I don't know. I'm willing to go up there and just check it out. And he says kind of up in the mountain, you need an ATV to get up there. He doesn't recommend walking. It's too much. But yeah, California is strange too. I mean, it's a really strange place. And as soon as I get that mold of that hand, I'll give you a jingle and you can look at the mold and see what you think.
Yeah, please, email me a photo or whatnot. I definitely love to hear more about it.
All right, cool, man. Well, thanks for coming on, and you can hang on for a minute once I just close this out, and we'll just chat just a few minutes, and that'll be it. All right, this is the Sabbath at Midnight. This is your host, Dominic, along with Lionel, and tonight we had Mark on, and we talked about megaliths, giants, and a little bit about history here in ancient America and around the world. From the low desert, somewhere not too far from Area 51, good night.